I'm just thinking, I haven't tested it, but I know Microsoft in general doesn't let you access shares with no password. So I think if you tried to make a home group with no password, it wouldn't work.
Don't home groups only operate on a LAN?
They operate on anything you record as you call home. So you choose the network type when you first connect to a network, so it could be anything except a domain.
But so,
So if you,
unless someone actually kind of get, unless they can get past your router and get into your home network.
that's right. That's right. As long as you use it correctly. You could go to a coffee house and call that home, and then your home group would run that. But of course, you're not supposed to. But it's not automatic. When you're coming to a new network, it asks you, is this home, work, or private?
So I guess what I'm asking is if you have a router.
Right, you have a router, yeah. Well, they can't connect from the other side of the router. They have to get on your layer 2 network.
So
Yes.
is that an acceptable answer? Is it?
Oh, but if you have an unsecured wireless network, then they're on your net. Because
Oh, if it's unsecured?
yeah, if it's unsecured, they can get to your
Oh, your
wire.
wireless
Yeah.
password, that's
Yeah.
what you're saying.
But there's no wireless, not your wireless password, your home group password. See, if you don't use a wireless password, which a lot of people don't, although it's less common
Well,
than
that's
it used to be.
assuming a lot in the
Then you,
question.
well, that's right. If you do let your neighbors, if you do let your neighbors connect to your wireless network, some people think it's harmless. A lot of people used to. And it is kind of harmless if you have home groups. There's another barrier.
Oh, okay. I thought the barrier was your wireless router.
Well, that's a good, this is,
Okay.
we would often want to put a barrier there, but you don't have to. And some people don't, like in a coffee house. Yeah, what's up? You had a question back there?
Oh, no, I'm
Yeah.
So if you set your network location to work, that wouldn't work?
Yes, if you hit your network location to work, your home groups will not operate. That's the whole point. So if you even have home group sharing, it doesn't activate unless you're in a home network. If you have any connection to a network that's not labeled home, home groups turn on.
So can I use that also, or no, only password was available?
Well, if you are at home, then you don't have that defense and you're using home group. Yes, Dan. All right. That's the plan. All right, so if you have a folder and your shared permissions give everyone full control and administrators read, and your NTFS permissions give everyone read and administrator full control, what happens when an administrator connects over the network?
Wait, administrator?
Yeah, Alice is a member of the, oh no, excuse me. Alice
But
is not a
then
user.
Alice is
Oh, she's a
standard.
standard user.
She's
Oh,
standard, not
If she's standard user and it's everyone full control, administrators read, Alice full control, then she gets full control from sharing. But the NTFS is everyone read and administrator full control. So she gets only read from that. So the answer is read.
Because he has
Yeah, got it.
question for Alex. So
What's that?
He get full permission, right?
Yeah,
Alex?
Alice, yeah. She has only read. Because, let me put it up here,
If she was
everyone,
administrator, she
Yeah.
gets the
Full
full
control.
control.
administrators had read. And Alice was named specially with full control, and this is shares. There's 2 doors you have to go through. So through this door, she gets full control. Then you gotta go through NTFS, and there, everyone has read, and administrators have full control. So here, she only gets that. So she fits in these categories. There's full control for being everyone and full control for being Alice, and here she has read for being everyone and nothing else. So the net result is read.
So doesn't the NTFS, that overrides the share?
No, they're completely separate. Share determines whether you can connect over the network, and the NTFS determines whether you can use it regardless of how you got there.
I
So,
thought the NTFS has more priority over the share.
well, you both have to be permitted to connect over the network. There are 2 doors you have to go through. So if this one limits her to read, then she only gets read. But if this one gave her no access, she wouldn't even get read. So you just pass through 2 doors. This one limits you, and that one limits you. If she logged on locally, then this would matter, and this would not be used. So they serve a different purpose. But one very common thing people do is they share a folder with share permissions, they forget to give people NTFS permissions, and then they can't get in. That's why they give you a sharing wizard and such. Yeah.
So the share is more for the local, and then the NTFS is more for the internet?
No, it's the opposite. The share is what limits what people can connect remotely. The NTFS limits it regardless of how they got there. So what this is a statement people often make is that you get no real security from a share permission. The real security comes from an NTFS permission. But that depends on whether people can get local access to the box. For example, if it's a server locked up in a server room and they can't log on locally, then share permissions are fine. But these are more the final answer. If you don't have NTFS permissions, you can't get in no matter how you got there. Okay? So this guy wants to control his Windows 7 home premium machine with a remote desktop, and it's not working. What's the problem?
This is Windows 7 Home enabled to receive remotes.
It's not. Windows 7 Home is not. You cannot be the controlled machine with home version. You got to update to a pro version.
You can, what is that? Called ping, I think?
And ping, you say?
Yeah, like when we're trying to share certain information from some.
Well, this is remote desktop. This is giving you full remote control.
It says, give them advice for how you will tell. It doesn't
Yeah,
really
yeah.
specify, in the question that you
Yeah,
asked, it
yeah.
doesn't really specify what, so it give them
It's kind of
advice.
broad.
The question, what you need to do, and the answer is he needs to upgrade the version. He can't ever make it with that version of Windows. It's nothing to do with the network or anything. If you're trying to control a machine and it only has home premium, you can't do that. You can do it.
So it will be that it's not possible because of different versions?
You can use different versions, but the one that is being controlled has to be professional or higher. You can control a professional machine from a home machine, but you can't control a home machine from a professional machine.
So
You could use remote assistance, but not remote desktop. All right, so this guy does IP config, and he's got 169.254, so what's the problem?
Gateway?
No.
Yeah,
It's
that's what I
DHCP.
Yeah, he's got DHCP and it failed. Like I said, it's a number you should memorize. When you see 169.254, that means it tried to get an automatic address and failed. So the cure is to reboot the machine, in most cases. Or IP config / redo, yeah.
Do we have to explain why it happened, or?
No, you just say, how do you fix it?
Solution.
Yeah, you say what you do to fix it. You just tell it to reboot the machine, that'll solve the problem most of the time.
Is it necessarily that DHCP is enabled? Could it just be that it isn't enabled?
No, if it
And
isn't,
again-
if no DHCP is not enabled, then he'll have a static address there, and that won't be 169.254. So when you see that number, it's not absolutely mathematically impossible, someone will manually configure it, but it'd be very strange. You can pretty much count, anytime you see that number, they have automatic addressing enabled, and it failed. That's the thing that causes that number.
So to go in and manually sort of set DHCP and renew the IP address, is that a solution?
Yeah, but you don't need to turn on DHCP, you know it's already on.
Or
You need to
check
do,
it,
you need
yeah.
your IP config / release and renew, or right-click diagnose, or disable and re-enable the NIC, or just
Right.
reboot the whole machine. Any of those would do. Yep. Anything that gives it a fresh attempt to get an address. All right, so there are the protocols. Let me just bring them up here. Now, in the modern world of Windows, you've got quite a few protocols on your adapter. And yes, okay, there they are. Okay. So the question here is, or when I say here, all right. If you're in a coffee house and you don't want people accessing your shared files, which one of these should you turn on?
I say clients from
File.
I say clients from
Client for Microsoft Network.
No, client is what you use to get in other people's shared folders. File and printer sharing is
I
what
thought
you
it
use.
was both of them.
No, the client is what lets you be the client, controlling other people's shared folders. That's not a risk to you. This is the one that's a risk to you, file and printer sharing. If you turn this off, that does approximately the same thing that the firewall does in public places. It doesn't acknowledge any requests. It's more secure, by the way, because the firewall is blocking it and that might possibly be penetrated, but this means the server service is turned off. So it's not listening to any requests. So that was the question. Which one will prevent people from accessing your shared folders? It's this one. If you uncheck that box, then you can be a client, but you can't be a server. And that's what you want in a public place. Yeah?
Which one, what is the link layer topology?
Yeah, discovery map.
mapper.
That's used to draw the network map. The responder is in every machine, so it sends information to every machine about its IP address and its location in the network, and the mapper is what draws the map. So you might, that's another kind of security risk, which is an information disclosure vulnerability. If you leave that on, other people might see you on the map. But
So
they-
when do
but
you
what
want
we-
to turn that off?
Well, you want to turn it off anytime you want people not to understand the topology of your network. That's why I'm surprised it's on by default. It would seem like you wouldn't really want it to be on by default because it means every user at every workstation can get a map of the whole network, which is normally more than they need to do their job.
But they won't be able to actually access your resources if you have the file and printer.
That's right, exactly. They still see your
So they
IP
can
address
see
and
what
such.
you have, but-
Yeah, and so, normally I would think only your network administrator should really get that now. But in Windows 7, everybody has default access to the whole Lumen app.
So if you don't uncheck it, then it'll automatically be.
Yeah, then your machine will automatically tell others if network discovery is turned on. There's a firewall setting for network discovery that blocks it. And if you're in a public network, it will also be blocked by the firewall. But if you're at a work network, it won't be. All right, good. Any other questions? Yeah.
Okay, I know that they have some of these devices where you can like take it on the go with you and you can connect wirelessly that
Right.
way.
That's going through the cell phone network. It's much safer because you're not on the local area network anymore.
I mean, not necessarily for the like phones that have the hotspot. I mean the actual like small wireless.
Yeah, but you get them
devices.
from the phone providers like Verizon and stuff.
Oh.
And what they're actually doing is they're contacting a phone network, and that's much safer. It's, you don't use like public wireless. You're going through a phone line. If I had a company and people had running confidential data, I would get them those devices and make them use them, turn off the wireless cards. You
So that's
can't-
why they give it a phone number because it's using a.
Yeah, that's what they are. They're just a little miniaturized version of the same thing. And that's much safer because it's point to point and you're not sharing that network with anybody before it gets to the phone company. And that stuff is all encrypted in 64-bit private encryption, which is pretty good. You're much safer than using public Wi-Fi. Any other questions? All right, let's get back to the usual stuff here. We're down to networking, monitoring, performance. So I guess I can hit shift F5. Yeah, all right. And this is the same in all editions. So everybody has similar problems. If you use a computer for a year or two, it starts slowing down. If you install more stuff, it slows down. And a lot of people have miserable machines that don't run very fast. So there's a lot of ways to find problems. One very common problem is you just have hardware problems. RAM fails pretty often. In the hacking lab with our 22 machines, within like 3 years, there were 3 machines that had bad RAM. And the RAM will cause the blue screen of death and other things. So Microsoft has a memory diagnostic tool. Some people tell me it's not incredibly thorough, but it's a lot better than nothing, and it did detect several cases of bad RAM. You can run hard disk diagnostics too. If you suspect your hard disk is defective, you can download a program from the manufacturer to test it. Drivers are often a problem. Updating drivers is usually good. You have to go to the manufacturer's website to get the latest drivers. The Microsoft Windows Update does not usually have the latest drivers. Even for Intel devices, it is very slow. But for some reason, the Microsoft list of drivers does not seem to get updated as often as it should. And another big thing, of course, is you've got too many processes running, too many things that launch at startup, a bunch of junk down in the system tray, hogging resources. And the malware is getting really bad. My friend over the weekend was infected with malware. There are 2 or 3 machines in the lab infected with malware. There is clearly, in the last month or two, I've seen some strains of nasty adware that hijack your browser and they go right through Windows Security Essentials. Microsoft Security Essentials like it's not there. So I'm beginning to think it's time to forget about Microsoft Security Essentials. We ought to be installing other antivirus in that. Because it definitely is not stopping the latest round of infections. And cleaning it off takes hours. You have to run NBAM and other tools. It's very annoying. There's several machines in the lab now have ads popping up and they redirect the search to some stupid search engine that's trying to pop ads up. And once that happens, then they get more infected because every time people search for something, when they try to download stuff, they're just downloading more and more junk. All right, so there's various measures of performance. Windows Experience Index is the simplest one that boils your whole machine down to one number. You can do it from the command line, but normally you just do system properties. And there's a health report and resource monitor too. Here's the Experience Index. You just go to Computer Properties, and you'll see the number, 3.3. This is a really simple number, and it doesn't relate simply to any numerical mathematical measurement. It just rates them. Memory operations per second, calculation per second, desktop performance, gaming, and hard drive speed, and it just takes the lowest of all those. And the only purpose of this originally was to determine whether to turn on Aero graphics or not, because basically Vista. I mean, Microsoft painted themselves into a corner with Vista. They announced the hardware requirements. They said it would run 512 megs of RAM. All the manufacturers manufactured all these machines with 512 megs of RAM to get ready to sell them for Christmas. Then they didn't even get it out in time for Christmas. And when they did, it didn't run in 512 megs of RAM. It wouldn't actually work. It needed a gig of RAM, but they weren't willing to betray Dell that way, so instead they lied and created something called Vista Home Basic and said it would run in 512 megs of RAM, which it didn't really, and carefully made a deal so it would not turn on the advanced performance to try to make it look better. And so that's what this was all about. If this number was below 1, you couldn't get Aero graphics. It would try to run you a more Windows XP type experience to make it run on those underpowered machines. And when Microsoft was sued for all this, And in court, their own product manager could not explain what Home Basic was, what the point of Vista Home Basic was. Couldn't remember why it was supposed to be different than the other versions. It's one of Microsoft's biggest boondoggles. Anyway, but the number persists and you can't use it to rate your machine. It's just a very crude score. Yeah.
I was a little confused about whether that actually measures performance or just the existing the performance of the
That's
hardware
right.
as you bought it.
That's
or
right.
if it would measure it if your hardware is degrading.
I think it actually measures it, because you have to, if you change anything, it'll make you wait while it measures it. So it actually does a performance test of some kind.
Okay.
But, so I suppose if your drive actually slowed down, it might pick it up, although I don't. That's a good question. I wonder, like, if your drive gets fragmented, if you can actually watch the number go down. But I wouldn't trust this number very much. It's just sort of an arbitrary number. You have to run a real benchmark if you want to get a reliable number. There are benchmarking tools you can download. So here's the system health report. You can get a report, which is Microsoft's measurement of all your various resources and how used they are. This is probably more like it. And this, I think, is really just the numbers behind that performance index. So it does measure a benchmark to some degree. If you want to see what's happening in real time, of course, there are lots of good tools. Your best friend is Shift Control Escape. Task Manager, been around forever, lets you see everything that's currently going on your machine. It's extremely useful. You can identify malware running and such. And the Resource Monitor is very useful to see if it's time to change your hardware. It gives you much better information than Task Manager. So here, in my overview, I got CPU, disk, network, and memory with handy charts. And I got all the details here, so it really, you can see a lot here. And the fun part I like is this memory bar. This really makes it easy to see whether you need more RAM. I'm actually using 1 gig of RAM. I've got another gig on standby, so this machine has 2 gigs, and that's all it needs. As you can see, I'm barely using more than 1. So if I were to add more gigs of RAM to this, nothing much would happen. It wouldn't really get much better. And that's a very important issue. I want to make this machine faster. More memory really won't do it. I should probably look at other things like maybe the hard drive needs to be faster or something. 56 used physical memory, here's the disk. Shows you various disk activity, and there's your network activity. These things auto-scale. So this does not mean you're hitting the maximum possible number of connections or the maximum possible use of the network. It's put this up at 10 kilobits per second. If I do something that involves some network traffic, like download something, like I downloaded Chrome. All right, that should create enough traffic to make that thing rescale. Now it's put above 10 kilobits per second. No, I'm not seeing it, but it ought to rescale. I don't know, maybe you have to close it, reopen it to get it to rescale. Yep, now it's 100. That's the point. You got to look at the numbers up there if you want to interpret these. There's the CPU percentages. All right, a lot of good information about what's really happening right now is available there to help you diagnose problems. All right. Inside Task Manager, your Processes tab shows you all the processes that are running. If you hit Show Processes for all users, you'll see all the internal Windows processes, which is usually a total of 50 or 60 or 70 processes or more on a modern machine. You can then terminate them. By the way, if you terminate this CSRSS process, you get the immediate blue screen of death. So watch it. When you don't get too happy terminating processes. And like here's Adobe Flash Player update. I don't need that. I can add, that's the service stuff. Look, it's got here. Chrome. I could kill host. I'm not too happy with that. What would I like to kill? MS Microsoft Security Client Interface. There you go. Let's try ending that and see what happens. Nothing much, like I thought. I'm not Java. I don't need to update my boom in Java. I can turn that off. One thing I often did in other labs where they had McAfee antivirus is I'd go terminate the stinking McAfee update because it meant you couldn't use the machine for the first 5 minutes every time you booted it up. It would consume 100% CPU. And anyway, you can terminate processes here, and this is relatively harmless because these are all processes that are running under your name. But if you show processes for all users, then you have these system processes, and a lot of them are critical Windows processes. So if you try to kill one of them, Microsoft will warn you, are you sure you want to do this? Do you want to add this? If open program is associated, you might lose data, you might result in an unstable system. This, by the way, is kind of a fun thing. You can end, notice I got a desktop and a taskbar and all that, you can end the Explorer process. And then you no longer have a start button, you no longer have a desktop. You just have an empty screen here. This is very much like logging out. This is something you had to do a lot in Windows XP to fix defects on a desktop. You'd be using the machine and you get like a half of a window frozen, stuck on the desktop that you can't close, just left over. And so the cure was to terminate the Explorer process and then launch it again. You can launch this, but even though we don't have any taskbar, you can hit Shift Control Escape to open this, and you can run it again. You can run another instance of Explorer. And that will redraw the desktop. So this is also how you get past Vista's reduced functionality mode. If you don't put a product key in Vista, after 30 days it goes to reduced functionality mode before Service Pack 1, and you can't see the desktop and you can't start apps. The only thing you can do is open a browser and go to Microsoft to buy a key. But you can manually launch the Explorer service and it comes back in. This will also work to hack into kiosks like you see at Cheers, so you have the catalog there and you don't want you playing video games on it. You can just launch. They've terminated the Explorer service after opening Internet Explorer. That's all you can see. But you can usually just open it and hack into the kiosk. But handling these processes and services one by one here is often useful, but you do have to be careful. You can blue screen your machine. All right. Here you go, terminating system processes. All right, so each process you see the name of the process, what user is running it, how much computer and memory it's using, and a description of it, which can help. You can show other columns if you want to, like this process ID. This is something that used to be useful in earlier versions of Windows, so you could connect it to the network resources it's using. But now you can see all that stuff very easily in Resource Monitor. If you want to see, for example, there's a question that's all I've always wondered about, and I don't believe I ever got a good answer. If you do netstat -an pipe more and look at the listening addresses, Windows 7 machines. This machine is listening on 139 and 445. That's file sharing, and this is low order stuff. But Windows 7 machines are typically also listening on a high numbered ports. And here they are. It is listening on ports about 56,000 and 62,000. And often there are up to 10 or 20 of these ports listening. And I don't know what they are. This one has far less than usual. But anyway, you want to know more, like if I wonder what's listening on port 1031, you can find out now in Resource Monitor. This used to be a bit of detective work required to answer that question in Windows XP. But in Resource Monitor, you can go to Network, and it shows you this, and if you go to the Network tab, it's got a tab for listening ports right there. So you can just sort by port. It's already sorted by port, and I can say, who's listening on 1025? Well, it's this, WinInit. And it's this local services. So it's not extremely useful to know, but so far I certainly can quickly find out which process is listening on that. And that's something I often wonder about. And if you do find unexpected listening processes, that could indicate you're infected by malware under remote control, or somebody has turned on a game or something, and you want to know, it means you're making network connections to another machine for better or worse, and you should really know what those are all about. All right, so that's Resource Monitor. You can do lots of good things in here, as we've been showing you. So, the basic, if your machine is too slow, the number one problem is usually not enough RAM. RAM is usually the answer. But other than that, you might want to mess with virtual memory, although there's almost nothing you can do about virtual memory these days. You pretty much have to leave it all automatic. Superfetch, you also don't want to mess with. That's the prefetch folder. These are questionable strategies left over from really old versions of Windows that you should turn off virtual memory or change it, or you should clear out the prefetch folder. Both of those are not recommended anymore. Ready Boost is a pig in a poke. When Microsoft brought out Vista, they said they were going to give you a performance boost by using a USB drive as a supplemental page file. And that had no measurable performance on any machine. I tested it. I think if you ran Vista in 512 gigs of RAM, you could actually see it boot up a little faster with that. That was the only case in which it made any difference. Apple is actually breaking new ground here. The new Apple operating system, Mavericks, will compress the RAM. If you fill up the RAM, instead of going to the hard disk, which is what usually happens, it has page faults. So you look for a page in RAM, but it's not there. It's been stuck on the hard disk in the page file. That is the process that slows down your machine, because the hard drive is thousands of times slower than the RAM. But what an Apple will do is it will zip the RAM. to make more stuff fit in RAM. And that slows down the process of fetching things from RAM a little bit, but nothing like as fast as the hard drive. This is a brilliant idea. And I think Microsoft should implement it. You should go through a process of that before you go to the page file. But anyway, like I say, startup programs, if you have too many things running in the background, it slows you down. Defragmenting disks is recommended for the mechanical magnetic disks, not for SSDs. And not filling your disk too much. You need about 15% free space, or Windows just doesn't run very well. And there are a lot of speed-up utilities and registry cleaners and stuff you could download, and a whole bunch of them just mess up your machine worse. Couldn't be dubious of those. So you have to have at least 1 gig or 2 gigs, and typically twice that if you want good performance. There's actually a maximum limit of RAM, which is mathematics. 32 bits can only go up to addressing 4 gigs of RAM, and probably 5 to 12 megs or a gig of that is used by your video card. So even if you put 4 or 8 gigs of RAM in a 32-bit system, you can only use 3 gigs of it. This is why 32-bit hardware is pretty much over, and the only 32-bit hardware anybody should buy these days is on a portable device, like a phone or something, where you're accepting that limitation for saving battery life and making it smaller. But if you get 64-bit operating systems, even the very cheapest ones will let you go up to 8 gigs, and the home ones will go to 16, and the Pro will go up to 192 gigs. Because, why bother putting any upper limit on the RAM? The mathematics doesn't put any restriction there. And a lot of people now buy machines with 8 gigs, even 16. The physical memory is the fastest memory for general purpose in your machine. There are a few registers on the processor and a cache on the processor, but you never access those directly. The RAM you use is your main RAM, 2 gigs or 4 gigs typically these days. Virtual memory is temporary use of a page file on the disk to simulate RAM. So if you have all 4 gigs full and you open another process that needs some RAM, it will take something that you don't appear to be using, put it on the hard drive, and use that RAM for the new process. And the new process will be okay. It'll take longer to launch the new process because you have to wait while it clears room in RAM on the hard drive. And then, when you go to launch that old process that isn't really in RAM anymore, it'll have a page fault. It'll look for it in RAM, and will find its note saying that is no longer here in RAM, you have to go look on the hard drive. That's called a hard page fault. And hard page faults are what really slow down your machine. And you'll see a list in Task Manager of how many hard page faults per second you have. If you have a lot of hard page faults, then you're very much slowed down for not having enough RAM. Anyway, kernel memory is the memory that cannot be put on the disk. That's the heart of the operating system that must be running at all times. If that stops, Windows crashes with a blue screen of death. And the cache memory, like I showed you, is that memory called standby in Resource Monitor. It is memory that is not actually needed at all right now, but instead of having your RAM chips just sit there idle, Windows will go fetch programs you used recently and put them up there in case you use them. But it's got nothing better to do. It just lines them up in the cache, and then if you click on them, they'll launch faster. Free RAM is RAM with nothing in it at all, and there's never any of this on a Windows 7 machine of any significance because it puts something in the RAM at all times, so you didn't waste your money buying those RAM chips. This confused people when Windows 7 and Vista first came out. People would say they're resource hogs. I put them in 4 gigs, and all 4 gigs are used. But you have to look in Resource Monitor, and you can see all 4 gigs are used, but not all 4 gigs are needed. They're just being used as a cache because they got nothing better to do with it. And the memory, the working set is the working set used by one process, the amount of memory. Commit charge is the total amount of virtual memory your machine has ever touched, and it includes the entire physical RAM plus the disk, because as soon as you use, say, 1 gig of physical RAM, your machine reserves 1 gig of page file in case it needs it. Doesn't mean it's actually using the page file yet, but it counts in the commit charge. And that's these things, hard page faults. That's when your machine looks for something in RAM and it finds out it's not even in RAM at all. There's a soft page fault, which is where your machine looks for something in RAM and it finds a pointer saying this has been moved to a different part of RAM. That's relatively harmless. But a hard page fault where you have to go from the RAM to the hard disk slows down your machine very dramatically. You don't want very many of those, or you definitely have overburdened that machine. You need to either run fewer processes or buy more RAM. Yeah.
Those last two went a little fast for me.
Yeah.
Could you go back to commit charge?
Oh yeah, commit charge. Oh yeah, commit charge. It's kind of a frustrating number. That's why this is what we had to. You used to have to figure this out when you would try to diagnose your machine from these numbers here. This is something you had to do in XP. If you wanted to figure out if you needed more RAM in XP, it involved a complex frustrating mathematical calculation based on these numbers. The commit in gigabyte is the commit charge. This is the total amount of RAM. The commit charge limit is the total amount of physical and virtual RAM available mixed together. And the current commit charge is the total amount of RAM you have ever allocated, even if it's not currently in use. So in fact, both of them are sort of theoretical numbers that tell you almost nothing, because you can increase the size of virtual memory at any time anyway, and your machine automatically will. So this is all this commit charge, I recommend not worried about it. It was necessary to use this number and do a complicated mathematical calculation to try to figure out if you're actually using up all your RAM in Windows XP, and nobody could keep it straight, and that's why they made this thing a resource monitor that does it for you. So now, if you want to know if you need more RAM, you just look right here and you can easily see. This is, the green is what I'm using, the blue is what's left over. That number is almost impossible to find in Windows XP. Yeah?
What's the orange for?
The orange is the stuff that's been modified and waiting to be refreshed or something. And here's the actual free RAM, which is always just a few megs, because it doesn't leave any unused. If you put in 2 more gigs, it will just increase the blue, but the pale blue and the pale orange will stay very small. Those are the parts that are actually not being used or anything sensible right now, and it decreases that to as much as possible. I mentioned the prefetch folder too. I ought to show you that in case I haven't in this class. If you do C, Windows, tab, I said. Oh, I didn't, I tried to go C:\\, okay. Windows, prefetch, there we are. CD, prefetch, okay. Don't tell me that, you're lying. I'd be administrator, okay. CD, Windows, prefetch. All right. There you have it. These are the 128 programs you've recently launched. And included in the metadata is the name of the person and the time they were launched. So this is a gold mine for forensic examiners. I can see what everybody has been doing. And the purpose of it is, it's the list of programs that Microsoft will prepare waiting in RAM for. It harvests them out of here. This is called the prefetch folder, and it uses it during boot up to populate RAM with things you're probably going to need because these are the programs you appear to use a lot. Just like if you right-click on any of these, there's a frequently used list here. It's just the operating system's frequently used list. What have you been doing? And this is all spying on you if you want to look at it that way. It's easy to see who's been doing what on your machine anytime from all these frequently used lists. You can see what web pages they go to, what programs they launch, and all that. It's used to make the machine run faster. This has been around since Windows 2000. Microsoft used to have menus that would just sit there, and then they made adaptive menus after that, where it would try to put the items you prefer closer to the top, and sometimes even hide the others. And they got heavily into this, keeping track of what you're doing to try to make the thing you like best pop up easier.
So what was the command you used again?
To see, it was prefetch. It is just a folder.
Just prefetch.
It's C Windows prefetch, just the name of the folder. It's called the prefetch folder, and it's mentioned in your book and such. Some people think you should delete the contents of the prefetch folder to make Microsoft recreate it because it's actually loading old stuff you're not using and your habits have changed. But the recommendation of your textbook author, which I think is good, is that you should just trust the operating system. It will notice if you're not using them anymore and clean them out eventually. But anyway, all right, so that's hard page faults. Hard page faults are when you look for something in RAM and it's not there and it has to go to the hard drive. Virtual memory is where it goes. You will find it in the root of C, this thing called pagefile.sys. It's always as big as your entire physical RAM. So I should be able to see it here if I do C. Let's see if I can, there we are. And then dir, the root of C, boy, all this junk in the root of C, that's actually considered a performance hog to put a bunch of junk in the root of C. Oh, I'm not in the root of C, I'm still in prefetch. I forgot to put the backslash. Okay. There, this is what you should do. I don't know what this nonsense is, but anyway. I have to do dir/a, don't I? See all files. And now I see hyperfile.sys, but I don't see pagefile.sys. /a/s. Oh, no, that's not fine. I'm searching. All right, let's try the GUI and see if I can find it. It may not be there, but it usually is on the root of C. There's hyperfile.sys, but I don't see it. So it's, I will demonstrate, here's how you control where the page file goes. Go to Computer Properties and Advanced System Settings. And in here, you have virtual memory. Visual Effects Processor Scheduling, Memory Usage, and Virtual Memory is where it's been for a long time. This determines, by the way, how much foreground programs get a boost. On operating systems like this, if I click PowerPoint and it's at the front, it will get twice as much RAM as every other process. Twice as much processor, twice as much CPU priority. So this will actually run much faster. Used to have an old XP project where students would do this. You run a program with text scrolling by. If you click one and run 3 copies of it, click one and put it to the front, and it scrolls by twice as fast. You can just look at it. Reason for this is it's an interactive desktop operating system. The one in the front that you're looking at is apparently the one that matters to you the most. So all the rest slows down and it gives more CPU to the foreground process. If you're on a server, then use this other setting here. So the default setting for client machines like Windows 7 is this one, adjust for best appearance. So the thing in front gets more CPU. For a server, you adjust for best performance. They've changed the words here, but it's usually the second option. I think that's what they mean, where you do not do this. Every process gets an equal amount of CPU, whether it's visible or in front or not, because a server's primary job is to do something like hand out web pages. If the administrator has opened a window, you don't want to detract from the web pages to make that window look faster. Anyway, that's what this adjusted is. And over here, on one of these other tabs is the virtual memory, which is here. Right now this thing has 116,500 megs of virtual memory, 16 gigs, which is a lot more than usual. And here's where it is. None on C. Someone has in fact customized it here. Okay, this is one of the questionable tweaks, not entirely recommended. You can see, if you have 2 physical hard drives in your machine, and this is really C, and you have another physical hard drive, and you call that D. Then your machine will be a little bit faster if you put the page file down here and put the OS up here. Because then Windows can be reading OS files from C Windows and C Windows System, and at the same time reading and writing to the page file. If you really have 2 physical hard drives and 2 hard drive controllers, so they can both be reading and writing at once, this will make you a little bit faster. And that's what somebody has attempted to do here by removing all the page file from C. In this case, this is a classic mistake people make. They take one drive and they partition it into C and D. And then they think putting the page file over here will help, and it won't. Because you can't be writing the page file at the same time you're writing C. That's what's been done on this machine. They've turned off the page file here and put it down there, which actually accomplishes no good at all. And by the way, it has a side effect. It means if the machine crashes with the blue screen of death, it cannot write a memory dump. The memory dump has to go use the page file here. So if the machine does die from the blue screen of death, you will not be able to analyze it with WinDebug and find out why it crashed. That's one side effect of taking some page file off the C drive. So it's typically best to leave some of the page file on the C drive. And though they've actually turned off the page file on this machine, no page file. Ooh, people really been playing games on this one. Anyway, this is also not recommended. Microsoft is not intended to run a no page file. Oh, pardon me. That's no page file for just that one partition, so it's not that bad. They turned it off on C. If I go to D, they put a page file. But what they've done here is something people used to do in really old operating systems like NetWare. And in Unix these days, you make a separate partition for the page file and remove it everywhere else. That's the old-fashioned way to make the machine run best. Microsoft Windows is not designed for this, and it's best to just let Windows automatically manage the page file. This is what's highly recommended. Don't do this, but it is available if you want to do this. On some servers running Unix, people will have no page file at all. They just have a certain amount of RAM to make it faster. Windows is not designed to run that way. It's best to let it manage its own page file. But anyway, old-fashioned people do mess with it that way. Right, so there's how you control your virtual memory settings. You can change them if you want to, but what's recommended is to just not change it, let Windows handle it. All right, that's what I talked about here. If you do disable the page file, then when a system error occurs, Windows will not be able to make a memory dump, which I used to think was impossible to analyze, but we're doing it in the malware analysis class. Those things are actually not that hard to read if you get WinDebug. So here's these performance enhancing technologies that Microsoft really implemented. There's Superfetch, which is that prefetch file, where it just decides when to cache stuff in RAM. This is automatic, and there's no way for you to adjust it or control it. ReadyBoost is using a USB 2 stick to try to speed up the machine by having a faster bit of page file on there. This turns out to be essentially useless. I was unable to find any condition under which it made any significant difference for a modern machine. There was a third startup memory enhancing technique that Microsoft announced when Vista came out, and they thankfully gave up before it actually happened. They said they were going to go on your local area network and find other machines that had extra RAM and put your data there and have it go over the network. Which is another way, of course, to get some RAM, but then what about security? Wait, that's my password, that's my confidential document, it's on some other machine, chosen at random? And they decided not even to do that. That didn't even ever see the light of day. But it was announced in the early days of Vista. But like I say, the one thing they missed with the Apple caught on to is why not just zip the RAM rather than go to the page file? That seems brilliant. Anyway, so too many startup programs will slow down your machine. You can get some idea about them from MSConfig. Really, really old utility. Good old MSConfig. You can go to startup, and it will show you things that are launching in startup, and another thing's been done on this machine that is not recommended. You can try to control them by unchecking them here. Microsoft does not recommend that. What they say is test it by unchecking them here, and if you don't like it, then go uninstall it. But you can attempt to control it with this. This is not incredibly reliable. It doesn't really catch all the automatically launching things like spyware. So there's a utility you can download called AutoRuns, which will assist internal utilities. They'll make a much more serious attempt to track down everything that's automatically launching on your machine and help you control what's launching. Defragmentation used to be quite a hassle in Windows XP and earlier, especially because Microsoft's defragmenter was a limited version of Disk Keeper, and it was broken. You could run defragmenter, it would take hours, and your disk would end up just as fragmented as before. And if you downloaded the real Disk Keeper, it would defrag in 5 minutes and actually clean it up. It was ridiculous. It was terrible, but now they finally fixed that, and Windows 7 automatically defragments, and you really don't have to worry about it. And then on top of that, it automatically defragments as a background job with low priority, so if you're using your machine, it waits. So it doesn't make you wait while it defragments either. So it's really very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Linux isn't defragment, right?
I have not heard of people defragmenting on Linux, and Apple used to not defragment either. And there were some research papers claiming that you don't really have to with modern drives. But on Windows 2000 generation machines, I remember you could actually see the performance difference. Your machine would be slow, you would defrag, and you could see it get faster. I don't know if that's really true. There is a division of camp in computer science about this. Some people say don't ever defragment, it's a waste of your time. Other people say it improves your machine. I don't really know the answer. Anyway, the other issue here is your disk just shouldn't be too full. The disk cleanup wizard will pop up if the disk is full. And here you've got an opportunity to remove things. You can remove downloaded files and temporary internet files, and then you get a chance to remove things that are kind of dangerous. You can delete your backups. You can delete your restore points. You can delete your Microsoft Office installer files. Those are really bad things to delete. You really need the installer files because Microsoft has a persistent problem with Microsoft Office that has been around for 10 years, which they never fixed. Which is if you're running Excel or PowerPoint and you go into the menus and choose an unusual feature, then it will often say, please insert the Office install disk so I can install that feature. And then tomorrow on the same machine, when you click it again, it will say, please insert the Office install disk so I can install that feature. It will randomly make you reinstall features when they're already on there. And Microsoft never fixed this. Instead, the way they fixed it was since Office 2003, when you install Office, it will make a copy of the entire installer disk on your hard drive so it can continually keep reinstalling stuff it doesn't need to reinstall there. So if you delete that, then your Office will actually pop up and ask for the installer disk when you're trying to use it. I don't know if they finally got that fixed in Office 2007 or 2010. They might have, but I kind of doubt it. I think 2007 for sure it was still broken. But anyway, you will get an opportunity to delete your Office setup files here. I just think you'll probably be sorry if you do that. So here's, like you've seen on this machine as an example, a lot of people like to mess with the page file, especially old server administrators from old systems like NetWare and Linux. They think you can eliminate the swap file if you have enough RAM. They think you can make a swap file at fixed performance on a separate partition. They even think you should defrag the swap file. These are really old techniques that really don't apply to modern machines. the prefetch folder you've seen. You can turn off prefetching, supposedly. If they said don't do it, you'll be sorry. Then that extra RAM will just, they're being wasted. And Superfetch is Microsoft's improved prefetch, filling that folder in some new advanced algorithm. And generally, you never adjust it or turn it off. You can turn off services you don't need, and there are often speed-up utilities. I saw quite a few of these in the days of Vista. I haven't seen so many since Windows 7, because Windows 7 actually runs pretty fast. Windows 8 runs pretty fast too, even faster than Windows 7. So, but anyway, you would often download this thing to speed up your machine, and it would just turn off lots and lots of things, like arrow graphics and smooth font curling on the edge of your letters and smooth scrolling when you drag windows around. There's a bunch of eye candy features that can be turned off that make your machine look more like a Windows 2000 desktop and of course run faster. These things tend to be a mess. I don't advise them because they, if you actually want to understand Windows and practice using features like IPv6 and home groups and stuff, you don't want it turning off all this stuff. Because of course you're breaking a bunch of features. You can just run an older version if you really want that. But anyway, there are a lot of speed-up utilities. And as you mentioned, there is this thing called Performance Monitor. This has been around since Windows 2000 Server. This is almost useless for a desktop machine. This is so complicated, it's for a server. You have hundreds of counters. You can count the length of the page. You can watch those page faults come in. You can count the queue of items waiting to write to disk. You can count the queue of items waiting to go to the RAM, waiting to go out the network card. And you can count each processor core separately or combined. And you can create these graphs and save it all the time. So if you want, you can benchmark all the detailed performance of your server, and then like a year later, benchmark it again and see if it's slowed down, and then if you buy another server or another hard drive, see how much improvement you get. It's appropriate for that kind of optimization, but for an end user device, this is way overkill. I think Resource Monitor is much better at giving you information you can use right now for an end device. For a server, this is what this is for. Anyway, I got a few eye clickers about this stuff. Come grab one if you need one. Good, I thought there would be a ticker, there usually is. So, what tool gives you one number like that to tell you how good your system is? Quit at 30. All right, that's Windows Experience Index. The one number. All right, what tool gives you a list of all the processors like that there? Check that flash in here.
My hand is
All right, and that is Task Manager. And one of the many fun things you can do in Task Manager for a long time was open Firefox and watch it use up all your RAM. Let's just go up and up and up, because Firefox had serious memory leaks, and especially put a couple extensions in it. I don't know if they got that under control. You used to be able to just watch Firefox use up your RAM. All right, the minimum recommended amount of RAM for Windows 7 64-bit from Microsoft, the minimum they say when you're installing Windows. All right, for 64-bit, they say you need 2 gigs. Yep, people remember that. Of course, in practice, the more the better. Typically, you start by doubling numbers, but anything below 2 and you are below Microsoft's limit. It doesn't mean you can't install it. You can put it on a 1 gig system, you can put Windows Vista, I think Windows 7 on a 512 meg system, and it will run in the sense that you get a start button, but when you actually try to do anything, it's really slow and annoying. So Microsoft just doesn't recommend you running it that way. What's the maximum amount of RAM for Windows 7 Ultimate 64-bit? All right, and of course, it's a lot bigger than any of that. None of those are big enough. It's 192, I think, or something, some very large number. I didn't think it was necessary to memorize that number, but to just know from common sense, they wouldn't limit the ultimate version to something pathetic like 8 gigs. That would be terrible. All right, so if you try to speed up your machine with a USB drive, what feature does that, supposedly? As soon as I heard of this, I went and bought a handful of them. I was going to give my Vista students a project where you see how much faster it gets. And then I tried it, it didn't get any faster. I said, well, that's the end of that. So Ready Boost is this questionable technology. Did not turn out to be much use of it. All right, so we ought to take a break. What is it, 10:14? Let's break to 10:25. Pretty simple stuff. And it hasn't changed in a really long time. All right. But will I move to the next slide? That's kind of irritating. All right, let's try it this way. There we are. All right. Same for all editions. And here's the stuff. This has been around for every version of Windows all the way back. You got to update your Windows. You got to update your drivers, of course. Your disk will accumulate errors, and defragging and backups are all good. The new thing in Windows 7 is the image-based backup, which is wonderful. I highly recommend it. It's so nice. It only takes like 20 minutes to make a backup and 20 minutes to restore, and then you've got rid of everything. Especially with all this nasty malware that's so hard to clean off, you really should have a good backup. So you don't have to waste a lot of time trying to clean the machine, you can just restore it. So Action Center is available. It will pop up with a flag in the corner if it thinks something is wrong. Like if your firewall is off or your antivirus is out of date or something like that, it will pop up and remind you that you should be doing these things. It monitors a lot of things, your virus protection, your spyware protection, your firewall, and other things, like backups. It will keep writing at you if you haven't turned on automatic backups every week of your personal files, which is what Microsoft recommends. Updates are automatic typically for home users. You do not want automatic updates at a company like this. But for a home user, you typically leave on automatic updates. The best thing for home users is just put on every update as soon as possible. In a business, it is not best, because there's two problems. One is that some of the updates actually break things, and they can bring your whole business to a stop. The other thing is, if the end users are clicking these boxes, some of them will say no, and you will not have control. You won't have a uniform level of updates everywhere, and that both makes you vulnerable, and it also makes your system run badly. If you have machines on a network and they have different levels of updates, it can lead to a lot of problems. I brought down a whole company that way one time. I updated all the clients, and I didn't update the server as well, and the whole network wouldn't work. So it's a, you do not do it this way at all in the company. You have an update server, and you push it out with group policy. And after you test the update, you push it out, and then they're all updated at once. You don't let them have any updates straight from Microsoft at all, because you want to control it. Unfortunately, you can't do this with your antivirus. You can't afford to put any delay in the antivirus update. Everybody just has to update the antivirus right away, or it's useless, because viruses spread in a matter of hours. So you really have to trust the antivirus companies, and they do drop the ball fairly often. Every year or so, some major antivirus company has a poison update. 2-3 years ago, McAfee had a poison update that killed 200,000 machines. It would delete an essential system file, so the machines couldn't even boot up anymore. I had a student who, I think, was working for the San Francisco government. There were 2,000 dead machines because of that, and he had to carry around a CD of each one booting to it to fix it, because they wouldn't even boot anymore. Every couple of years they do that. But still, in practice, most people agree that the antivirus solves more problems than it creates. But it does create some problems. So you can control the update schedule here if you want to, what time it's going to download and whether it's going to go on automatically. The default is good enough for Windows 7 endpoint machines. There was a lot of angry people at the launch of Microsoft Server product when they now servers install with automatic updates turned on. And that is insane. That is just automatically get me fired is what that is. When your server goes down and the boss says, why did it go down? And they say, well, I left on the self-destruct feature that just causes it to put on updates. Then you're going to be looking for another job very soon. And that's why the server admins in the room in the Microsoft launch, they said from now on, I think it was Server 2003, next one, Server 2008, it's going to come with automatic updates. You said, what? Are you nuts? You never automatically update a server. For one thing, it'll restart. That's bad enough. But the other thing is we know very well, especially, there have been 3 patch Tuesdays this semester. The first 2 of them had poison patches. The first time I think there were 8 poison patches that killed machines. Next time there were 6 poison patches that killed machines. You really don't want to put that junk on a server. They don't test them enough. Although to be fair, I think Microsoft tests their updates more than anybody else. The very worst thing is Linux updates. Man, don't trust anything from Ubuntu. That stuff is really nasty. Something like, my experience was something like 1 in 5 of them will kill your machine. It's something like 1 in 50 of Windows updates that will kill an important process. But still, that's a lot for a server. Anyway, your device drivers, like I said, you can update them with Windows Update, but you usually will really not get the latest drivers there. So if you really want the latest drivers, you have to go to the manufacturer of your device, your network card, your graphics card, or whatever you're trying to update. You can download from the Microsoft Update Catalog. You can get standalone versions of updates, and this is what you do at businesses where you want to make one central location and have everybody download from one location, convert it to a CD. You can get all the updates. If you do an automatic online update, it only downloads the updates appropriate for your machine. If there's an update for Microsoft Office and you're not using Office, it won't bother. If there's an update for drivers but you don't have that hardware, it won't bother. So total file download will be smaller if you do it online. But then you can't use that for all the machines that are coming. So you have to go here to get the complete update package that applies to all hardware. And here's the WSUS is the free version, MOM is the pay version. These are the Microsoft servers that manage updates for companies. And you should definitely use this instead of endpoint automatic updates straight from Microsoft at a company. If you try it the other way, you'll be sorry within a few months as you watch bad things happen, like somebody's machine is not updated and they're getting infected. Other people put on the bad update that breaks my critical file. By the way, if you have pirate Windows that will not pass the Windows Genuine Advantage test, you can still update it. That's what WinDiz Update is. That's the point of this. These guys just got a legal copy of Windows, they download the updates, then they post them on the web, so everybody can get them. And the paper-thin cover story is, this is for people who don't like IE and want to use Firefox. They want to put their updates on through Firefox. Now, it's not that they're using pirate Windows, oh no, it's just that they don't like IE. Anyway, so, but if you do have people using pirate Windows, get them to at least update their stinking machines. Piracy is one crime, having an unupdated machine is another crime. It's like not vaccinating your kids. You're a hazard to all of us, you know. So, all right, disks have errors. Modern disks have an endless series of small parts of the disk failing and just being replaced by others. This, in fact, is why Microsoft, I think, correctly points out that RAIDs are now obsolete. And you may remember from like all your networking classes, you can combine disks into a RAID. If I have like 3 physical hard drives, and say each of them is 100 gigs, I could make a RAID 5. Then a RAID 5 would store a total of 200 gigs of real data. It would store some real data, and then some parity data. And the next time it would put some parity up here, some real data and real data. Next time it would put parity here, and real data and real data. So I'd only get 2/3 of the total storage. But if anything failed, this disk would be marked bad. It would take out the disk, put in a fresh disk, regenerate all the data, and you go on. This is a RAID 5. This is what the standard for high performance has been for a long time. But what Microsoft has pointed out correctly is with modern drives being so big, like 1 terabyte and up, they have an endless series of failures. So if you buy a 1 terabyte drive, they really give you like 1.1 terabytes of platter. And as individual parts of the drive fail, they will just mark this one bad and that one bad. They will silently map in sectors from the extra. So your computer has the impression that every sector is still good and continue to read and write data. You don't know. The drive controller has invisibly mapped another sector on top of the failed ones. So since they have so many failures, suppose you have one sector fail here. You don't want to take out the whole drive, replace the whole drive, wait for 1 terabyte of calculation because one sector failed. This is pointless. You need something smarter than RAID, and that's what the new Windows format is. Windows RE, I think. They're beyond NTFS for server clusters. There's a new Microsoft format which does something more sophisticated than RAID. Like have redundant information in the little clusters, and if one of them fails, you can just turn off one cluster and replace it. So you can have a fault-tolerant multi-drive array that is not RAID, because RAID is too wasteful. For modern-
Is that automatically?
Yes. And I'm pretty sure, let me look it up, I'm pretty sure that's WinRE. It's not in my slides here. It's new with Windows 8 and Server 2012. But I think it's RE, let's see. Yeah, Windows Repair Environment, I think, let me see. No, that's not it. All right, let me get the new replacement for NTFS. See if I can find it. Yeah, the next generation file system, here it is, REFS. REFS is it, for Windows Server 2012. Microsoft is pushing it. So you should just be aware of this. This is the next new hot thing. REFS replaces RAID is what it really replaces. And it's a redundant file system that has extra copies and can recover from errors without requiring you to place the whole drive platters, because that doesn't make any sense with modern hard drive platters. Resilient file system, that's the term. A fun thing to know.
So what's the relation with NTFS?
Yeah, it's the newest one from Microsoft. See, Microsoft was going to replace NTFS. Ever since Windows XP, they've been talking about it. They were going to make a WinFS that was indexed, so search would be faster on the end station, and they delayed it and revised it and delayed it and finally banned it. They're never going to replace NTFS. But this is the new file system. It doesn't really replace NTFS. It's something you can use on a server. However, who knows? Maybe when Windows 10 or something, they'll start using this on the client and multiple drives on the client. But this is a way to get resilience even without multiple drives. The individual sectors make extra copies. Of course, you still have a single point of failure with the drive controller in that case, but it might be better. So that's the game. This is a different file system with a different use in mind. But it's a good thing to know about. REFS. Anyway, so disks have errors, and you can check your disk for error with the old check disk utility that's been around, I think, since MS-DOS. And so there's a graphical version and a command line version. They both do essentially the same thing. If you right-click your drive and go to Properties, you can go to Tools, and you can turn on error checking, defrag, and backup. So this will run check disk for you. If it's not a system problem, it will run it right away. If it's C, which it usually is, then it can't do it while you're running. It will just schedule it, and at the next boot up, it'll do a check disk before you start. And this is what good old Windows 98 always used to do every time it crashed. You'd restart it, and it would say, lost clusters found on disk, please wait while a progress bar goes across. That's check disk. It can take a while, but it does go through your whole disk. It walks through all the, see, your disk has segments and clusters, and the clusters are chained together. So one file, a big file will have a cluster here and a cluster here and a cluster here. At the end of each cluster, it says, here's the next cluster. So it walks down the chain of every file to make sure all those clusters are really okay. And if it finds lost clusters, that means there are clusters here and I can't find any file name connected to them. That means the chain is broken somewhere. And it can attempt recovery. It will try to guess what cluster it went to and try to rebuild the file. Forensic tools do the same thing. If you analyze a hard drive and you're looking at deleted data, there's still images and Word documents and stuff on there, but you've lost the file name. And you have to sort of try to reconstruct them. Forensic tools will do that for you. Anyway, this will automatically fix file system errors. You can also scan for and attempt recovery of bad sectors. If you uncheck both boxes, then it will just analyze it and give you a report without attempting to fix it. That is not normally what you want. You might possibly want to do that if you prefer to use some other repair utility. This is what Steve Gibson's claim to fame. Steve Gibson wrote something called Disk Keeper, or I don't read the wrong name. Steve Gibson made this disk recovery utility that he claims is much, much better than anything else. That really will revive your dead drive, really find all the data and fix it. They make a big deal out of it. Some people love that thing, a lot of people say it's useless. He doesn't even tell you exactly how it works. But there are third-party tools. Sometimes people used to like something called Norton Disk Utilities that some people like, and then you might not want to use the built-in Microsoft one. Anyway, if you are doing the system logging, will say it can't check it while it's in use, just schedule a disk check, and the next time you restart, while it's putting up the text screens of starting, it'll run a disk check. And that can take a really long time. It can take even days to complete if you have a slow hard drive and very big. When I do it on modern machines, it's not that bad, like maybe 10 minutes. But it can, in principle, be a very long time. All right, it's automatically run if your machine crashes or if it shuts down abnormally. Now, Windows 98, if you just turned it off at the power button, it would do a disk check. But that's because it was fast. NTFS is a journaling file system, so if your machine is halfway through writing to the disk and it gets interrupted, like the system crashes or the power fails, it can pick up where it left off on the next reboot. It knows, I just moved the first 100 clusters of data and I have 50 more to go. I'll just pick up where I left off. Most of the time, it does not create a disk fault when the system crashes. But if it does, it sets the dirty bit. And remember, we talked about the fsutil command line thing a while ago. You can use to set control the dirty bit. If it boots up and the dirty bit is set, that means there is an error on this drive, and then it has to run a check disk before it starts. Anyway, so you can run check disk at the command prompt. With check disk and administrator command prompt, /F to fix and /R to recover. This is usually what you do, /F/R. Then you get the check disk that will generally fix your machine. Commonly, the symptoms that lead you to go to check disk are the machine won't shut down, it hangs, or it has a blue screen of death. Then a check disk is often a fix. You can run check disk in a Windows recovery environment. If you can't even boot up the disk, you can boot from the CD, get your DVD, get to the recovery environment, and run check disk in there. Unfortunately, for some unknown reason, they changed the command line switches just to give you a headache. You have to use check disk /P/R instead of /F/R. It's pointless cruelty, but anyway, you can run a check disk in that environment. All right, defragmenting. Defragmenting will take your files and line them up neatly. So files are unfortunately stored in 4 kilobyte clusters, which is a really small amount. So it takes 50,000 clusters to store a 200 megabyte file. So if your disk is empty, it'll just use 200 right in a row, but if you put on some files and delete them and put on files and delete them, and after a while it gets like this red one, and even scattered on the other tracks too, where you just have pieces of the file scattered in a messy way. And this is supposedly makes the disk work harder and slower to read and write because it has to keep searching for every little bit instead of putting the head in one place and just ripping the data right off as it goes by. So just defragmenter lines them up so that they're pretty. It automatically runs anyway. You don't normally have to do anything. You can choose to launch a defragmentation yourself manually if you want to, but you just have to be kind of weird to want to do this, or old-fashioned. You can run it from the command line also. There's one rule: you have to have 15% free to defrag, because it has to be able to move the things around into a temporary place while it's reshuffling and neating them up. If your disk is more full than that, then it will refuse to defrag. One of the many reasons you shouldn't run Windows with your drive very full. All right, and by the way, it doesn't defragment junk, like things in the recycle bin, the page file. Why do you want to neaten up the trash? It ignores that. It makes sense. You can defragment SSDs, but it is recommended not to. SSDs don't care about fragmentation. They have no problem with random access. They're like RAM. So if you have cluster 1, cluster 10, cluster 10,000, cluster 3, cluster 50, that's perfectly fine. And another subtlety is SSDs remap the virtual clusters anyway in the controller. So you cannot access the physical location of those clusters. If there's supposed to be 1 million clusters, and you think you're writing from 100,000 to 110,000, you're not. You're writing to whatever it feels like telling you. It's calling 100,000 right now to 10,000. It is constantly remapping them in the background anyway. There's a more complicated process called garbage collection going on, where it's finding clusters that are mostly empty, retrieving the used data, and cleaning off the old data to make them ready for future write. So your attempt to defragment it from the computer is actually not making any sense at all, and generally not recommended. It just wears out the drive for no reason. SSDs do have a problem. They have a limited number of read and write cycles. So any unnecessary reading and writing on them is shortening their lifetime, and it doesn't make them run any faster. But you can run the defragmenter. Microsoft supports it. It's just not recommended for any brand of SSD I'm aware of. All right, so you clean up disk space, remove temporary files, remove programs you're not using, turn off program components you don't need. Then you get on documents you don't need. You can also use real-time file compression. Modern version of Windows will actually do this automatically for some folders, but see what's happened right here. My recycle bin is compressed, my iNet pub is compressed. If you don't use a folder or a file for a while, Microsoft will turn it blue, automatically compress it with NTFS compression. NTFS compression is transparent. If you compress something, you double click it, it opens. All that's happening is it's using a few more microseconds to open it because it has to unzip it first. It's not very good compression. It does not shrink files very much. It does something very simple, like if you have long repeated lines that are all zero, it'll shrink that. But it's not, doesn't compress it as much as, say, WinZip. But it's something, and you see it automatically compresses things it thinks you don't want to use. They just turn blue on you. And you can choose to compress more folders if you want to save some room in your hard drive. I really wouldn't bother these days. Hard drives are cheap. It'd be a lot better to just get a bigger hard drive. The disk cleanup utility will pop up. You can also run it manually, and it will try to clean it, recommend things you might want to remove. You can go to clean up system files, and then it will recommend things you might want to think twice about, like your restore points and your backups. You can't delete those, but man, that's pretty desperate. I wouldn't delete your backups. Give me a break. You need those. Anyway, that's the game. You can do it. You might also have a Windows.old file if what happened is there was Windows XP on there and somebody just put Windows 7 right on top of it, and maybe you can delete that. That's where all the previous stuff that was in the old operating system are. Unless you care about that, you might want to do that. Other than that, I would steer clear of deleting system files. But you can if you're desperate. So, the last batch of iClickers. Which one of these will need more space on the hard disk? Until 30. All right, and, oh, that's what I thought. This is a very common misconception, and I wondered if people had gotten better. Disk defragmenter does not make more space. It just rearranges it. If you had 100 gigs of files, after you defragment it, you still have 100 gigs of files. They're just arranged neatly. None of these make any more room on the hard disk. If you want to get more room on the hard disk, you have to delete something. And none of these will delete anything. It's a very important fact, and very common misconception. People think defragmenting makes more room on the hard disk. It's just like deepening up your bookcase. Instead of books and papers all messed up, you line them up. But there's still the same amount of total information on disk. You can't make any space free unless you compress something or delete something. Cleanup is the only thing that actually makes more space. All right, what's the file system that prevents dirty disks? The one recommended for Windows 7. Go to 30. All right, NTFS, we're still using the same file system forever. FAT32 is from good old Windows 98. It's not recommended at all anymore. It's much less stable because it has dirty disks when you shut it off. WinFS is the one Microsoft promised they would have and never actually developed and finally abandoned. That was the replacement to NTFS that never happened. ext3 is for Linux. Now, Linux has now moved up to ext4. All right, so which utility requires 15% free hard drive? All right, and that's defrag. You need some room to do defrag. Which one of these can take hours or even days?
defrag is slow, but check disk can be even slower. I've never heard of defrag actually taking days, although hours used to be pretty quick.
You know,
Yeah.
I just had a question about that, because, you know, I actually just experimented and did a check this
Yeah.
on Windows 8 little laptop, and it took like 3 minutes.
Yeah, but on older hard drives, it was a lot longer.
Okay.
Yeah, that's, in Windows 98, you got used to. Windows 98, you really have to wait like a half hour every time. Your book says it can take days. I never saw those. I think those must have been server drives. There is a Windows, there's a Linux equivalent called, four-letter term, FSCK. FSCK, which can take days. And that's the equivalent. It's trying to retrieve data from a struct volume. And it does it by doing multiple reads and writes and trying to compare them. That's also what Steve Gibson's product does. There are people that will try to figure out the data from the imperfect, buggy performance of an old disk. There are a lot of people desperate for this because they don't back things up. Drive Savers is a whole company just for this purpose. You can ship them your damaged drive and they will retrieve the data. And then ship you back a new drive with the data mined. They're making a ton of money there. It's a great company in Nevada. Anyway, this is a big problem. A lot of people can get data from a damaged disk because they don't back their stuff up. All right, which one of these requires Windows Server? WSUS, Windows Software Update Server, is a server product you run on Windows Server to update all your clients. These two are on Windows 7, and that's on the web. All right, let me see who got the most right, and I'll go up to the lab.